woman described in her tomb reliefs as a king's daughter and a king's wife, Hemet Nisut, a title that sometimes means secondary royal wife during the New Kingdom. Her exact relationship to Ramses I and to Seti I is not known, because QB33 provides the only material evidence of her existence, and because the Ramesside royal women's tombs employ a rule of decorum prescribing kings' images and kings' names from their decorative programs. The rest of the South Flank tombs were intended for royal women whose names do not survive or were never written. QB36 was cut and decorated for an unnamed king's daughter, and QB31 and QB40 were both prepared for royal women who held the king's daughter and great royal wife titles. The South Flank Queen's tombs are the simplest of all overall in terms of both architecture and decoration. In his topology of the New Kingdom tombs in the Valley of the Queens, Christian LeBlanc categorizes those on the South Flank as type 1, which he defines as a relatively simple tomb type, in which the exterior staircase leads to a principal room that communicates with one or two annexes. In all but one of these tombs, the principal room is the sarcophagus chamber. However, QB40, the last tomb cut and decorated on the South Flank, does not neatly fit into the type 1 category. Rather, QB40 is a transitional tomb that bridges the line of development between the simpler type 1 tombs and the subsequent, more elaborate tombs of Ramses II's royal women on the North Flank. QB40 is the first Ramesside Queen's tombs with an antechamber preceding the sarcophagus chamber. And unlike the other South Flank tombs, QB40's antechamber is its principal room. Moreover, its decorative repertoire expanded significantly in concert with its plan. All three of its chambers were decorated, and new scenes were added to the tomb program for this purpose. With the sole exception of QB73, the tomb of Henutawi, the Type 1 tombs of Ramses II, the Type 1 tomb of Ramses II's daughter, wife Henutawi, the North Flank tombs belong to LeBlanc's Type 2 category, which is characterized by its clear architectural differentiation into an upper level consisting of the antechamber and a lower-lying sarcophagus chamber. Type 2 tombs also typically had varying numbers of annexes attached to the antechamber, to the sarcophagus chamber, or to both. Each Type 2 tomb has a transitional zone linking the antechamber to the sarcophagus chamber that I have categorized as a major, a medium, or a minor descent. The first type is a relatively long, steep descending corridor that's architecturally subdivided into an upper half with a recessed shelf and a lower half that lies beneath the floor level of the antechamber. The second is a shorter descending corridor that is not divided into segments, and the third is simply a small set of steps rather than a corridor. The North Flank Type 2 tombs are larger and far more architecturally complex than those on the South Flank, and the number and types of scenes employed in the decorative programs of the Type 2 tombs increased in concert with the tomb size and complexity. There are, however, significant differences in plan among these Type 2 tombs, and a further division of this group into subtypes is a useful tool for discerning hierarchical distinctions among the royal women, as I will demonstrate later. To this end, 6 of the 8 tombs can be ordered into subgroups based on strong similarities in plan and program, and the tombs within each subgroup appear to have been cut and decorated around the same time. These 3 subgroups, from earliest to latest, are QB80, the tomb of Tuli, and QB66, the tomb of Nefertari, QB68, the tomb of Merit Amun, and QB71, the tomb of Bentinah, QB74, later usurped by the Watent Hepet, and QB75, the tomb of Henut Nira. The remaining 2 tombs, QB60, that of Nebekhawi, and QB73, that of Henutawi, can be dated to periods that either overlap with or fall between the cutting and decoration of the subgroup 1 and 2 tombs. QB60 combines features found in subgroups 1 and 2, while QB73 is a simpler Type 1 tomb that is significantly smaller and less complex than the other North Flank tombs. The last known Queen's tombs cut and decorated in the valley were the 2 20th dynasty royal women's tombs on the West Flank. QB51, the tomb of Isis, a great royal wife of Ramses III, mother of Ramses VI, queen whose precise place in the 20th dynasty has been debated by scholars, some identifying her as a wife or daughter-wife of Ramses III in the early 20th dynasty, others associating her instead with Ramses the 9th, 10th, and 11th at the dynasty's end. However, her association with Ramses III has been bolstered, if not proven outright, by the recent rediscovery of unpublished copies of a tomb robbery papyrus, which identifies a Queen Titi as a wife of Ramses III. Both QB51 and QB52 have symmetrical cruciform plans, each comprising a long, narrow, rectangular antechamber, leading to a sarcophagus chamber that is narrow and rectangular, as in the case of QB51 in particular. For those who may not be familiar with the Book of the Dead, it is a new corridor, the lower half of which was decorated with Book of the Dead 151, a chapter that summarizes the funeral rites and provides protection for her corpse, and the sarcophagus chamber, decorated with Book of the Dead 144 on its local west half, and Book of the Dead 146 on its local east half. These latter scenes depict Nefertari demonstrating the esoteric knowledge that allows her to pass through a series of netherworld gates. Despite the heavily damaged state of Tui's tomb, the surviving relief fragments in QB80 suggest that Tui's tomb had been almost as elaborately decorated as that of Nefertari. Moreover, it was also adorned with a large number of Book of the Dead scenes. Tui's antechamber was adorned with a different set of Book of the Dead scenes from that of Nefertari's antechamber, as Book of the Dead 18, a chapter describing the various councils of netherworld deities, appears in the local west half of the chamber, and the more solar-themed Book of the Dead 15 and 16 adorn the local east half. Like Nefertari's tomb, the lower half of Tui's descending corridor appears to have been decorated with Book of the Dead 151 motifs, and the surviving reliefs in the sarcophagus chamber on the sarcophagus chamber walls indicate that it too was decorated with Book of the Dead 144 vignettes on the west wall and Book of the Dead 146 vignettes on the east wall. Sorry, I've got my slides a bit out of order. So this is Book of the Dead 144 and 146. Furthermore, the well-preserved program in Nefertari's tomb and the surviving reliefs in Tui's tomb indicate that both possessed text-heavy versions of the Book of the Dead chapters throughout the tomb, in which the chapter text appears along with the vignette. When Book of the Dead chapters appear in most other Ramesside queens' tombs, usually only the chapter illustrations and simple captions are employed. Though the Book of the Dead illustrations alone were clearly considered sufficient for the scenes to be ritually effective, the execution of long vertical columns of chapter text in painted relief, covering large areas of wall space, would have been far more time-consuming than the creation of illustrations and simple captions alone. And this suggests that there had been a greater expenditure of labor and longer preparation times necessary for the completion of Tui's and Nefertari's tombs than for those of the other queens. The second subgroup, QB71 and QB68, are the tombs of the two eldest daughter wives of Ramses II. Bintanath, the king's firstborn daughter, whose mother was Nefertari's co-queen Isitnofret, and Merit-Almond, the third daughter born to Nefertari, and the fourth-born of Ramses II's princesses. QB68, Merit-Almond's tomb, lies immediately to the east of Nefertari's tomb, and QB71, the tomb of Bintanath, is on the east side of Merit-Almond's. QB68 and QB71 are similar to each other in size and plan, though QB71 is marginally larger and more elaborate. Both tombs are smaller and have simpler plans than either QB66 or QB80, and each possesses an antechamber with two largely destroyed piers and lateral annexes. However, QB71 also has a unique undecorated subchamber, which is the lowest lying chamber in the tomb and is situated directly underneath the antechamber's west lateral annex. Instead of a descending corridor, QB68 and QB71 each possess a small set of steps leading down to the sarcophagus chamber. Each tomb's sarcophagus chamber has a simple, shallow sarcophagus depression in the relative center of the floor and one small rear annex. In addition, QB71 sarcophagus chamber has benches along both side walls. Both tombs are similarly decorated with a series of divine scenes, each showing the queen offering to and receiving favors from the gods, from various gods and goddesses. The sarcophagus chamber of Bentenot's tomb also includes the vignette of Book of the Dead 138, a chapter allowing the queen to enter the retinue of Osiris. And this chapter has, again, just a very simple caption. The third subgroup includes QB74, the tomb later usurped by Duat-Antipet, and QB75, the tomb of Henut-Ra, a later born daughter of Ramses II and an unknown mother. The plans of both tombs are essentially smaller, simplified versions of those in the first subgroup, in other words, those of Tui and Nefertari. Each tomb possesses an antechamber with two piers, a short descending corridor, and a sarcophagus chamber with either 2 or 4 piers, 2 in the case of QB74, 4 in the case of QB75. Neither tomb's sarcophagus chamber possesses annexes or sarcophagus depressions. QB74 has one lateral antechamber annex, while QB75 possesses no subsidiary annexes at all. That these two tombs were decorated at roughly the same time is supported by the fact that both have antechambers adorned with the same decorative scheme, one that in my dissertation I've called the Sat-Ra repertoire and have discussed elsewhere. However, the other chambers were decorated differently. QB74's east lateral annex is adorned with Book of the Dead 180, as in the scenes that you saw previously in Nefertari's tomb, and with divine scenes. QB75's sarcophagus chamber program comprises the Book of the Dead 16 vignette and other divine scenes, while that in QB74 is a combination of Book of the Dead 151 motifs and divine scenes. QB60, the tomb of Nebet-Tawi, is situated at the west end of the north flank in front of Tui's tomb. Nebet-Tawi was Ramses II's fifth-born princess, and likely a daughter of Isip-Nofret. Nebet-Tawi's tomb possesses an antechamber with 2 piers, a local east lateral annex, and a rear annex. Like QB61 and like QB68 and QB71, there is a minor descent comprising a few now very heavily eroded steps leading down to the sarcophagus chamber. As in the tombs of Tui and Nefertari, Nebet-Tawi's sarcophagus chamber has 2 lateral annexes and 1 rear annex. Though the plan of QB60 possesses the basic architectural components found in other types of north flank tombs, it also has a unique vaulted ceiling over the front half of the antechamber. This vault, which once rested upon the 2 now largely destroyed piers, would have turned the front half of the antechamber into a virtual transverse hall. In terms of decoration, Nebet-Tawi's tomb is the only other queen's tomb, besides those of Nefertari and Tui, adorned with text-heavy Book of the Dead chapters. Unlike QB80 and QB66, however, these are limited to Nebet-Tawi's antechamber, which is decorated with Book of the Dead 18, as in Tui's antechamber, and the Book of the Dead 125 Negative Confessions. Unusually, there are also 2 versions of the Book of the Dead Ra Osiris scene in QB60, one in the local east antechamber annex and one in the local east sarcophagus chamber annex. The rest of the extant program features divine scenes. QB73, the tomb of Henut-Tawi, the 7th-born princess and the 4th daughter of Nefertari, lies between QB71, the tomb of her half-sister Bentenot, and QB74. QB73 is the smallest tomb on the north flank and has the simplest plan. It comprises a rectangular sarcophagus chamber with 2 piers, a small rear annex, and an east lateral annex. Like most of the earlier Type 1 tombs on the south flank, there is no antechamber, and QB73's sarcophagus chamber communicates directly with the tomb entrance. tombs was dedicated to its owner in one of two ways. Some tombs were prefabricated in advance for a specific royal woman. Some tombs were personalized in advance for a specific royal woman whose name was fully incorporated into the painted relief of her tomb's decorative program and appeared throughout. The rest were prefabricated tombs that were fully decorated with a program rendered in painted relief for a particular type or rank of royal woman with specific royal affiliation titles. However, blank cartouches, blank spaces, or both were left throughout the program so that the name of the queen or princess ultimately buried there could be painted in later. Personalized tombs suggest that their owners were well-established, influential royal women whose high position at court and close relationship to the king were especially secure, because each of these tombs necessarily entailed advanced planning for the interment of the specific royal woman buried there, planning that may have taken many years, particularly for the cutting and decoration of the larger queen's tombs. Thus, a personalized tomb appears to have guaranteed the owner's burial in the Valley of the Queens. The prefabricated tombs, however, give no evidence of any such advanced commitment prior to the tomb owner's burial, because the dedication seems to have been made very quickly and with a minimum of effort by painting the name of the deceased royal woman in a single cartouche, perhaps around the time of her burial, while all the other cartouches and spaces were left blank. The tombs of Nefertari, Tui, Meritamen, Bintanat, and Nebetawi were all personalized, while the rest were prefabricated. It thus seems likely that personalized tombs were created for women who had greater seniority and status than those buried in the prefabricated tombs, because all 5 women buried in the personalized tombs are more frequently attested as Hemet-Nesu Weret on monuments from the reign of Ramses II than are Heneptawi and Henep-Ra, who were the 2 youngest royal women interred on the north flank. There is also a correspondence between the specific location on the north flank and whether the tombs were personalized or prefabricated, as the 5 personalized tombs were located at the west end and center of the flank, while the 3 easternmost tombs were prefabricated. Another difference that sets some north flank queens' tombs apart from each other is the present or absence of royal donation formulae, which state that the tomb is a gift of an unnamed king and lists the titles, epithets, and name of the deceased queen. These formulae appear as dual mirror composition text adorning the lintel and jambs of doorways, usually the doorways of lateral annexes. That the king is not named is consistent with the rule of decorum that prescribed kings' images and names from Ramesside queens' tombs. As far as it was possible to tell, these formulae did not appear in the tombs of Tui and Nefertari, where the jambs and lintels of doorways were either decorated with each queen's names and titles alone, or in the case of Nefertari's tomb, some annex doorways had no special decoration, but blended in with adjacent wall scenes. During Ramses II's reign, the royal donation formulae are only employed in the tombs of his daughter wives. There are several possible explanations for their use at this time. It may directly relate to the deceased woman's king's daughter title. There may have been a change in fashion that occurred after the deaths of Tui and Nefertari. It may be an indicator of lesser seniority or rank, perhaps suggesting that the daughter wives had greater dependency on the king and less power, autonomy, and wealth than Tui and Nefertari, or some combination of these reasons. A further distinction made between queens on the north flank is found in the regalia worn by selected royal women in their tomb images, particularly the double-plumed headdress, which may have been an iconographic indicator of higher rank among New Kingdom royal women. Every Ramesside queen buried in the valley, Sat-Ra Titi, is depicted in her tomb wearing the same style of long, diaphanous white linen gown and a vulture headdress topped by a flat modius crown. But all of the queens on the south flank and most of the queens on the north flank wear no other diadem except this combination of vulture headdress and modius crown. Tui, Nefertari, and Nebetawi are the only queens on the north flank shown wearing double plumes in their tomb scenes. Even more subtle distinctions can be made concerning the frequency with which the queens are shown wearing this particular diadem. Nefertari wears the double-plumed headdress in scenes from every chamber in her tomb, save for the 3 sarcophagus chamber annexes, while Nebet-Tawi is shown wearing the double plumes only in her sarcophagus chamber. One surviving image of Tui as a sphinx in QB80's east lateral antechamber annex is shown wearing the double plumes, but most of the other images of Tui are either too heavily damaged to determine what type of headdress she was wearing, or they are completely destroyed. It seems reasonable to speculate that she might have been shown wearing the double plumes throughout her tomb like Nefertari in QB66, but this conjecture cannot be proven. Another iconographic distinction among the daughter wives of Ramses II is the employment of scenes showing the deceased queen offering a small figure of Ma'at, a goddess who personifies cosmic order, to deities. The scene type occurs only in the tombs of Bintanat and Nebet-Tawi. In Bintanat's tomb, there is one scene depicting the queen offering a small figure of Ma'at to the divine dyad of Ta and Ma'at. In Nebet-Tawi's antechamber, there are 2 extant, though damaged Ma'at offering scenes. One on the antechamber's entry wall. One scene depicts the queen offering Ma'at to the deities depicted in the Book of the Dead 18 vignette. The other shows her offering Ma'at to the deities in the Book of the Dead 125 negative confessions vignette on the adjacent lateral wall. The employment of this scene type is noteworthy because it's one of the few representations of an ancient Egyptian royal woman offering Ma'at. The others are the Amarna queen Nefertiti and the 3rd intermediate period and late period gods' wives of Amun. Prior to the Ramesside period, the only non-pharaoh shown performing this act was Nefertiti, and this was an exceptional device specific to the unique kingship ideology of the Amarna period, conveying her parity with Akhenaten. Unlike Nefertiti and the gods' wives of Amun, however, Ramesside royal women are only depicted offering Ma'at in their own tombs. They never elsewhere encroach upon this otherwise kingly prerogative. However, the fact that they are given license to perform an essentially kingly act in the context of their own netherworld landscapes further supports the notion that royal women were accorded special status in the funerary realm that was perhaps allowable only because the king is never shown in the tomb. It also sets Bintanat and Nebet-Tawi apart from their sisters and half-sisters. So in conclusion, an examination of the 8 tombs of Ramses II's royal women in light of differences in size, plan, programmatic complexity, and the use of royal iconography indicates a hierarchical ranking strongly, though not absolutely, correlated to relative seniority. Size, complexity, and whether or not a tomb was personalized seem to be the most consistent indicators of relatively high status, while the use of royal donation formulae is perhaps the most ambiguous criterion concerning rank, though it likely indicates a generational distinction. Taken together, however, these differences corroborate the impression of the relative hierarchical standing of these different royal women that is gleaned from evidence outside the funerary realm. This evidence suggests that the hierarchical preeminence of Nefertari and Tui over all the other daughter wives, while Meritamen, Bintanat, and Nebet-Tawi form a second hierarchical tier. Within this second tier, however, Nebet-Tawi's tomb stands out as the largest, most complex, and most elaborately decorated, while Meritamen's is the least. Nebet-Tawi is also shown in her tomb with more iconographic indicators of higher status, though she was younger than the very prominent Bintanat and Meritamen, and is not as well represented in the surviving monumental record of Ramses II's reign, as are her 2 older sisters, though surviving may be the key word here. Henut-Tawi and Henut-Nirah, the 2 youngest daughter wives buried on the north flank, seem to form the 3rd and lowest hierarchical tier. Of these, Henut-Tawi's tomb is the smallest and least elaborately decorated. Thank you for your attention. Anybody have any questions? Well, that's a very good question. The Book of the Dead was, there was were in use during the New Kingdom. Some of those books were only intended for kings. Books like the Amduat, the Book of Gates, uh, they were only used in kings' tombs. Other works, like the Book of the Dead, were used, all by kings, by queens, by princes, and also by private individuals. And because that was the funerary book that was allowable by decorum to be used in queens and princes' tombs, that's in fact the one they used. Although there is a difference insofar as queens' tombs have a much wider variety of Book of the Dead scenes than do princes' tombs, most of which are just Book of the Dead 145. So that essentially is why there are so many Book of the Dead scenes. That's the one corpus of New Kingdom funerary literature texts that are allowed in queens' tombs. Yes?
I have a related question.
Yeah.
Is there anything revered that provides particular scenes or pictures, particular circumstances?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I actually did an interpretive analysis of the decorative programs in the Ramside Royal Women's Tombs. And, scenes are chosen for different reasons. They convey, they function in different ways. Some scenes are used to convey both a sense of place and a process. For example, some scenes are chosen because, for example, let's take the Book of the Dead 16 scene that I showed from a couple of tombs. Those always appear near doorways. Book of the Dead 16 is a scene that shows the solar deity, Ra-Horakhti, rising amongst the mountains. And this notion of solar emergence both, establishes the entry wall where they're shown, which is always near a doorway, as a place of emergence. It serves that cosmographic function. Scenes are also chosen because they evoke the various processes that the deceased was believed to undergo in the afterlife. For example, there are certain scenes that only appear in sarcophagus chambers. You will only see the god Nun, who represents, the primordial water from whom, the sun is reborn. You will only find, depictions of Nun in the deepest, darkest places in the tomb, in the sarcophagus chamber, nowhere else. So they serve a purpose. They're chosen, and there's some variability. There are a range of scenes that can be chosen to express these ideas, but there are sort of two things going on. They establish a cosmographic sense of place, and also evoke the processes that the deceased undergo or hope to take on. Yeah. A few did.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, okay. She noted that among the Queen's tombs, very few sarcophagi survive. And yes, that's true. And you have to keep in mind that these tombs were very badly ransacked. And by the end of the 20th dynasty, many of these tombs had been completely robbed. So even in antiquity, most of the grave goods, were just stolen, destroyed. A few sarcophagi are left. If you go to the Cairo Museum, Bint Anath, Ramses II's oldest daughter, wife, still had her coffin, her sarcophagus can be seen. Also, Henut Ra. The sarcophagi of Merit Amen and Nefertari were very badly damaged, but there are still fragments left. Right? And Labib Habashi published some of the inscriptions that were found on those sarcophagi. But yeah, that because there are very few artifacts from these queens' tombs, simply because they were ransacked by the end of the New Kingdom, and then they, I'm sure, were part of the whole process of when when the Valley of the Kings and Valley of the Queens were effectively, deaccessioned as royal burial grounds, and, anything that was left was, reappropriated for the state. So that happened at the very end of, the New Kingdom, beginning of the Third Intermediate period. So, yeah.
These were executive or parliament?
I'm sorry?
Polygamy or?
Oh, polygamous, many of the marriages occurred at the same time. Um, Ramses II had a number of official wives, and actually an unusually large number of great royal wives. You usually don't see a king who has that many high-status queens, because usually there's just one. But, here his two major wives at the beginning of his reign were Nefertari and Isithnofret. Around the time of Nefertari's death, perhaps even a little before, he married Bintanoth and married Amun. I also kind of tend to think that Nebatawi was, that her tenure as queen was earlier on too. LeBlanc, I think, tends to put it later, but I tend to think that she was, among the same group. And there were also the foreign wives, like the two Hittite princesses that he married. So yeah, the short answer is yes, they're polygamous. Yes.
What does the term daughter wife?
Means that she was his daughter and his wife. Think about that for a while. And shudder. Yes. That's a good question, and many people would like to know where she's buried. Okay. She wanted to know what happened to Isithnofret and where was she in all of this. And the fact is that nobody has yet found her tomb. Nobody's quite sure where she was buried. It's possible that, you have to take into consideration that there were a lot of queens, both of the 18th dynasty and the Ramesside period, that are still unaccounted for, really. And what we have, the tombs, that really represents a relatively small percentage of these queens. Isithnofret is one of those of whom we don't know where, her body, if it's there somewhere in one of the mummy caches, has not been found, has not been identified, and, there's no trace of her tomb anywhere. Yes. In the back, I'm sorry. There are two people in the back.
The woman who was, I don't know if you would define it as a ceremonial act, but she was performing an act because the king was not there, so she was able to perform the act that only the kings usually could. What was that act that she was performing?
The presentation of, did everybody hear the question? Okay. She was asking me about the ritual act I was discussing earlier, the queen's presentation of Maat. That's what it's called. Presenting a small figure of Maat, the goddess of the goddess of cosmic order, to a deity. And
was there any evidence or enough evidence to prove that the wives believed in becoming gods or coming back to life with the symbols in their...
Well, the ancient Egyptians didn't believe that literally you would walk out of your tomb. The Egyptians had, believed that the soul sort of had different parts that sort of fragmented. And in fact, the Book of the Dead is actually somewhat of a misnomer. It's an Egyptological convention. It's actually called the Book of Coming Forth by Day. And it's that coming forth of the mobile aspect of the soul, the Ba soul, that's being referred to. And I think there's as much evidence as there is in kings' tombs that queens were believed to, live among the divine after death. In fact, there is one scene in the tomb of Nefertari that very explicitly shows, Nefertari taking on the guise of one of the guardians of the Book of the Dead 144 gates that she herself confronts. And what's interesting about this is that that's the one scene where she's shown with, because one of the things I looked at was gender-based color encodement, and most of the images of the royal women have skin tones in the male range, but this one shows her as a fully divinized being, with the conventional, canonical yellow feminine skin tone. So yes, I mean, I think there's plenty of evidence to suggest that, Egyptian queens and Egyptian women in general, I think, were not deprivileged of the same kind of afterlife that men and kings had. Some scholars have argued to the contrary, but I think, again, there's ample evidence that they were believed to enjoy a rich afterlife experience just like their male counterparts. Yes. You know, I was
Can you
interested
repeat
at
the question?
oh, I'm sorry. It's sort of personal. She asked me what sparked my interest in this field. And yes, I don't like to get touchy-feely, but when I was very young girl, about 4 or 5, I became very intensely interested in ancient Egyptian art. And I just thought it was beautiful. And I think I was also sort of a death-obsessed child. and I would look at these beautiful Theban tomb paintings, and there was, that absolute certainty of this beautiful afterlife. And I always found that really comforting, too. I just found it aesthetically beautiful, and also just, from on a, very, kind of emotional level, very satisfying. Yes.
Are any of these queens' tombs open to the public?
The only one that is currently open, and again, well, it's open every once in a great while, is the tomb of Nefertari. And I never know when that's open. I mean, that's subject to, the Antiquities Organization. They said when it's open and when it's not. Up until recently, the 20th dynasty tomb of Titi was open to the public. However, that was closed about 1 or 2 years ago. So when you go to the Valley of the Queens now, you get rather a false impression of what the valley was, because I should backtrack a bit. During the early 20th dynasty, Ramses II constructed 5 tombs for 5 of his sons. And they were built during a very short period, about 10 or 20 years. And I think much is made of the fact that there are these princess tombs there, when otherwise it was an entirely female cemetery. And right now, the only tombs that are consistently open to the public are a few of the princess tombs. So you really don't get a sense of what the valley was and what its main function was. Yes.
What about Nefertari's tomb is so much better preserved than any of the others?
It is just the vagaries of archaeological survival. I mean, it's just an amazing, it's just random happenstance that, and also lucky happenstance that the tomb that is the largest and most programmatically complex is also so wonderfully preserved. The tomb of Tui, as you saw, is right next door to it, and its reliefs are completely blackened. Many of them are, eroded. I do not know. It's just one of those things, one of those vagaries of archaeological survival. Yes. Oh, sorry.
How extensive is the book of the dead? And are all most of the descriptions the same, or one part of it?
Oh, well, the Book of the Dead is, in a way, sort of a mishmash. And it is a collection of spells, and there are certain editorial changes that occur over time. So it's not, it's not like the Amduat or the Book of Dates where you have, these 12 hours laid out very neatly and nicely. certain, certain things are added. For example, over the New Kingdom, for example, Book of the Dead 180, that version in Nefertari's tomb is the first known version. So, I mean, it's one of the things that I'm, looking at and plan to publish soon, is an article that examines the role of Queen's tombs in developing certain scenes and motifs, and Book of the Dead 180 is one of those. So yeah, I mean, there's so much variation over time, and it sort of becomes, I think, more standardized in the late period.
I think we'll end the questions there. I don't want Dr. McCarthy to be at your audit.
I don't mind if you.
Sure.
No, not a problem. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask one for fun. You know, when you look at the tomb of Nefertari, you see her playing a game of board game, and it's so much fun to see somebody at leisure. I just wondered if any other seeds of queens doing something like that.
Well, as in Egyptian art, you can't just take things at face value, and that's it's a wonderful scene. It's one of the Book of the Dead 17 scenes that I showed earlier. She's playing a game of drafts, and the thing about I believe it was Timothy Kendall wrote an article about this particular scene called "It Is All in the Game," where he very convincingly argues that this scene of playing drafts is essentially a summary of the purpose of the Book of the Dead. That it's essentially showing the deceased having successfully played the game, having successfully and come through it. So it's wonderful, but it also has a very deep significance. Most of the scenes in the Queen's tombs are they're very ritualistic. They show cultic activity. Even the Book of the Dead scenes. Basically, the scenes can be divided into: the Queen is performing cult for deities in different contexts, or she's receiving favors for them. Sometimes they focus on deities specifically, and the Queen plays a relatively minor part. She's off to the side, but it's basically those two actions. The Queen gives to the deities give to her.
Over all those dynasties, did ever any queen bury the king?
Oh yes, and In fact, there are many burial patterns showing that, for example, just off the top of my head, the tomb of Amenhotep III, which had a space, a chamber, an undecorated chamber allotted for the burials of Ti and Satamun. So queens in the 18th dynasty, before the Ramesside period, tended to be buried either in the tomb of the king who was reigning at the time of their death, either their husband usually or their son, or they were buried in small undecorated tombs near kings, near the Valley of the Kings. So yes, they were buried with kings sometimes, just not apparently in the Ramesside period. Yes.
Since Nefertiti went into single god approach, was her tomb allowed to be in the Valley of the Queens? Or?
No, because you actually don't see queens' tombs until the 19th dynasty. This notion of giving queens these very large, elaborately decorated, independent tombs in a discrete necropolis, because keep in mind that the Valley of the Queens is completely separate from the Valley of the Kings. It's about 1.6 kilometers away, and it's just in this little valley all by itself. Nefertiti was actually intended to be buried in the royal tomb at Amarna. And again, it's a matter of debate whether she actually was or not. Maybe she outlived. I mean, there are many scholars who believe that she sort of outlived the demise of the Amarna period and the use of Akhetaten as a capital. But that was where she was intended to be buried initially.
Hello?
I'm sorry, did I miss something? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, what are negative confessions?
Oh,
This
okay,
says
that's right, oh, I didn't see you
the
back there.
negative confessions vignette. What are
Yes.
negative confessions?
The Negative Confessions is a Book of the Dead chapter. Um, it is essentially sort of a ritualized purification of the deceased. It's a chapter wherein the deceased says, you know, I have not done this, I have not done this, I have not done this. It lists all of these, you know, awful things that would, you know, perhaps impede the judgment of the deceased in the afterlife. So it's a declaration that the deceased is ritually pure and can go on. And I'm sorry, I missed you. No, I think there was something else going on. I mean, I think that there is, that in the Ramesside period, there is just this notion that, you know, the queens have their own kind of realm. They're buried in a cemetery that's, you know, separate. They are buried, you know, and each tomb is a little microcosm of each queen's personal netherworld. It's their own netherworld landscape, and it's a landscape where they reign supreme, where there is no king. I mean, the king is only acknowledged in terms of his title, in titles such as Hemet Nisut Weret, you know, the word Nisut king. That's the only place where the king exists. The person of the king does not. The individual that occupied the role of king, you know, does not appear at all. Is never, you know, is not mentioned. You know, is never shown. So yeah, I mean, I think something different is going on. Sort of an elevation of the queenly role, perhaps.
Would it also be possibly the fair upbringing about, you know, what he has, and they're all acquisitions of things. The more stuff
Oh, that's a very negative attitude. Well, you know, I don't think that's what's going on at all. I mean, I don't think that the queen's tombs are decorated with a male viewpoint. I think if they were, you would see Ramses. I mean, Ramses is